still smelled like cinnamon and resentment. You know the kind of scent I mean, like someone baked pies on top of 30 years of unspoken bitterness and dusted it with nutmeg to hide the rot underneath. Thanksgiving in our family was always a performance. The kind where everyone smiled with their teeth, but no one really wanted to be there. Well, no one except Elaine. She lived for this shit. She loved to host, to be the center of the table and the center of attention, and somehow she always got both. Even when it wasn't technically her house. We were all sitting around Mom's dining room, which hadn't changed since 1992. Same floral wallpaper, same lace curtains, same giant wooden cabinet full of crystal no one ever used. The kind of place where time just settled in and refused to leave. I hadn't been back in 4 years. Not since Dad died, and even then, I was the last to know. Elaine didn't call. Mom sent a 2-line text. Dad passed. Service Monday. That was it. No call. No voice. Just a message like she was canceling a dentist appointment. So yeah, when I walked through the door this year, the room went a little stiff. Not full-on silent, but you could feel the shift. Like someone turned the heat up a few degrees and no one wanted to say anything about it. I came in with a bottle of wine and a pie from a bakery in town. Nothing fancy, just something that said, I'm trying. And maybe I was. Maybe I really did come hoping for some kind of peace. Fool's hope, I know. Elaine greeted me first, arms out like we were old friends. She hugged me too hard, her nails digging just a little, her voice syrupy sweet. Danny, look at you. You haven't aged a day, she said, which was rich coming from someone whose forehead looked like it was laminated. I smiled, kept my tone light. Well, money helps. She laughed, fake and sharp, like the edge of a wine glass right before it breaks. Dinner started normal enough. Turkey was dry, stuffing was decent, and Frank, Elaine's loud, beer-breathed husband, made a toast that included a fart joke and a jab about my big city lifestyle. I laughed along, because what else do you do? No one wants a scene at Thanksgiving. Not right before the pie. But then, just as the plates were being cleared, and Mom got up to put on the coffee, Elaine leaned over, her voice low but perfectly audible. You only got invited because Mom felt bad. No one really expected you to come. Just like that. With that little smug tilt of her chin and a look like she'd just stepped on a roach and enjoyed it. Frank chuckled under his breath. Mom didn't turn around. She heard it. I know she did. She just kept pouring the decaf. I didn't say a word. Not a single goddamn syllable. I just looked at Elaine and smiled. A slow, cold smile that I think unsettled her more than anything I could have said. Because for the first time in maybe forever, I didn't rise to it. I didn't give her the show. I just sat there, hands folded, and waited until Mom brought out the pie. And here's the thing most people don't understand. Revenge doesn't need to be loud. It doesn't have to come with yelling or slammed doors or broken plates. Sometimes, the best revenge starts with pie. You wait until they're full and sleepy and feeling safe, and then you serve the first course of consequence. As we passed the plates around, I helped Mom slice the dessert. She was tired. Older than I remembered. That sharp edge she always had was dulled now, but not gone. I looked at her, really looked, and something settled in my chest, not sadness, not anger, just clarity. I'd spent years trying to earn a seat at a table that was never built for me in the first place. Elaine kept talking, little digs disguised as jokes. Danny, remember when you ran away from home for a week and no one noticed? Laughter. Danny, didn't you say you were gonna buy a Tesla last year? Guess that didn't happen. More laughter. I smiled again. The kind of smile that says you have no idea what's coming. When dinner finally ended and everyone shuffled to the living room to pretend they wanted to watch football, I stayed back to help clean up. I picked up plates, scraped stuffing into Tupperware, ran the faucet like I was part of the wallpaper. And as I stood at the sink, elbow deep in lukewarm dishwater, I looked over my shoulder, just briefly, and saw Elaine watching me from the hallway. She looked smug, satisfied. Like she'd won something. Like she always won. I dried my hands, stacked the plates neatly, and gave Mom a quick kiss on the cheek. She looked tired. Not guilty. Just tired. Maybe that's worse. Then I turned to Elaine and said, "Thanks for the invite." "Really?" She smirked, already turning away. "Sure, anytime." That was the moment I decided I wasn't coming back for Christmas. I wasn't coming back for birthdays or anniversaries or any more one-sided dinners where the love had an expiration date and mine ran out 20 years ago. 3 days. That's all I needed. I had something planned. Something small, private, but just loud enough to echo. As I left the house that night, full of dry turkey and quiet rage, I looked back once, just once, and thought, let them keep their table. I'll build my own. And when I do, I'll make damn sure they're all invited just once to watch what it feels like when the forgotten one finally sets the rules. You don't really notice the cracks in a house until you stop pretending they aren't there, and the same goes for families. They hold themselves together with silence and habit, not love, and sometimes, when you're the kid who learns early not to ask for more, you get really good at reading the room before you even learn how to read a book. That's who I was. That's what I became, the self-sufficient one, the easy kid, the one who never made a fuss and always cleaned his plate. And maybe that's why no one remembered I was even in the house most of the time. When I was 7, I won a school-wide art contest, a crayon drawing of a farm with cows and an old tractor. They hung it in the hallway for the whole year. I brought the ribbon home, beaming, waiting for someone to notice. Mom barely looked up from the phone. "That's nice, honey. You always keep yourself busy." I still remember the way she said it, like busy was a bad habit. Meanwhile, Elaine brought home a participation trophy from some spelling bee, and it got framed like it was the Constitution. That was the rhythm of our house. Elaine received praise like it was air, and I had to earn every second of acknowledgement, which almost never came. By the time I was 13, I stopped trying. I focused on school, worked a part-time job at 16, saved every dollar I could. I wasn't angry back then. Not yet, anyway. I was just done. I watched my mom and Elaine treat each other like sorority sisters while I floated somewhere between hired help and forgotten luggage. My dad, he tried, I think. He was quiet, like me, and he stayed out of the drama, which in our house meant he mostly stayed out of everything. We'd go fishing once in a while, and he'd hand me a beer like it was some rite of passage, but even then, his words felt borrowed, like someone had coached him on how to be a dad, and he still hadn't gotten the hang of it. I left home at 19. Took my savings and one suitcase and bought a one-way ticket to Denver. No goodbye party, no tearful send-off. Elaine said, "So you're really doing it?" And I just nodded. Mom said, "Well, you've always been independent," and I think that was supposed to be a compliment. I called a few times the first year, got short responses and long silences. Eventually, I stopped calling. That was the deal. I disappeared, and no one came looking. What they never knew, what they never bothered to ask, was that I did okay. More than okay. I started flipping small properties, learning every inch of drywall and broken plumbing along the way. I failed a few times, slept in a busted truck for 2 months once, but I stuck with it. Eventually, I built something solid, 3 homes in 3 states, steady income, no kids, no chaos. I kept my life clean, uncluttered, peaceful. But peace has a price, and mine was silence. For over 34 years, and yes, 34, not 35, I'm not that bad at math. I kept my distance. And they kept pretending I was just too busy to care. After Thanksgiving dinner, once the football was on and the others were half asleep in food comas, I stayed behind to clean up. Just like old times. The sink was full, the dishwasher broken as always, and the green bean casserole dish had the kind of baked-on crust that requires elbow grease and regret. I rolled up my sleeves and got to work. That's when I heard them, my mother and Elaine, in the next room, talking low but not quite quiet enough. I wasn't eavesdropping, not really. I just didn't move. We need to make sure everything stays in the family, Mom said, her voice thin like thread pulled too tight. Elaine scoffed, that same little laugh she's had since she was 12. Don't worry, he won't care. He never does. He's got his own thing going, right? He never needed much, Mom replied, as if that justified everything. There was a pause and then laughter. Like a shared joke, an inside thing. It was so familiar it made my teeth itch. I kept scrubbing the dish, hands shaking just a little, water too hot now. And maybe it was that heat, or maybe it was the 34 not 35, years of swallowing this kind of shit. But something clicked. That casserole dish hit the counter harder than I meant it to, a little chip cracking off the side. I stared at it for a second too long. Then I dried my hands, walked into the hallway, and without looking at either of them, said, "Thanks for dinner. I'll be heading out now." They both turned. Elaine blinked. Mom smiled with that fake softness she saved for church ladies and neighbors. "Leaving so soon?" she asked. "Yeah," I said, grabbing my coat. "Got something to plan." And I meant it. Because on the way out, I pulled out my phone and sent a text I'd already drafted the night before the turkey, before the snide remarks, before I even stepped through that door. It said, 3 days. Make it discreet. Dinner for 5. Plus Janet. It took exactly 3 days to plan, not because I was rushed or careless, but because I had been building toward it for 34 years without realizing it. 3 days was just the time it took to make the arrangements, the reservations, the catering, and the calls, but the idea, the true seed of it, had been sitting quietly inside me since I was a boy standing outside the living room door, listening to a family that never saw me as part of it. So when I pressed send on the invites, physical ones, real cardstock, hand-delivered, it wasn't impulsive. It was precision. Each envelope had their full names, no nicknames, no warmth, just formal, stiff lettering on thick paper. Inside, the message was brief but deliberate. Private dinner in your honor. Thursday at 7. Attire, formal. Hosted by Daniel. No return address. No RSVP line. No explanation. I wanted them to stew. And knowing them, they did. I knew Elaine would come, if only out of pure narcissistic curiosity. She'd think it was about her, maybe a surprise announcement, or some overdue apology, or worse, a chance to gloat over some faux success. Frank, her oaf of a husband, would follow her like a mutt follows a burger. Margaret, my mother, would come because she couldn't stand the idea of missing something that wasn't under her control. And Donnie, well, inviting Donnie was the final seasoning on this strange little stew I was cooking. Donnie was my mother's nephew, my cousin on her brother's side, and no one had seen him in years. Back in high school, he had a brief, scandalous thing with Elaine, one of those late summer hookups that ended in screaming and a dented fender. He moved to Arizona shortly after, became some kind of desert mechanic/conspiracy theorist, and sent out Christmas cards with wolves and AK-47s on them. He was a mess, but he was my mess, and more importantly, he never kissed us. That's what made him perfect. The dinner was set in a private room of a quiet old inn at the edge of town, the kind of place with wood-paneled walls, antique mirrors, and servers who looked like they'd seen it all but didn't speak unless asked. I chose the lighting carefully, warm, but not cozy. Just enough gold in the air to make people feel off balance, like the light couldn't decide if it was day or night. Everyone arrived late, of course. Elaine walked in first, in a tight maroon dress that looked like she planned to win a prize. Frank came in behind her, already halfway into a bourbon buzz, wearing a sports coat 2 sizes too big. My mother followed, regal as ever in a navy blue suit with a brooch shaped like a swan. She looked around like a queen inspecting enemy territory. And finally, Donnie rolled in wearing snakeskin boots and a BLO tie, grinning like a man who'd brought his own popcorn to the chaos. The table was long, polished, set with white linens and gold-trimmed plates. At the head sat Janet Morales, my attorney, calm, unreadable, in a tailored black suit that said, "I'm not here for dessert." She stood as they entered, shook hands politely, offered no further explanation. I let the tension simmer as drinks were poured, appetizers served. No one really touched their food. Margaret leaned forward first, voice dipped in honey and suspicion. "Daniel, dear, what's the occasion?" I smiled, lifted my glass. "It's a thank you dinner," I said, voice steady. "For each of you." Elaine tilted her head, already skeptical. "A thank you? For what, exactly?" "For making me who I am," I said. "By showing me exactly who not to become." Silence hit the table like a dropped wine bottle. The soft jazz from the corner speaker suddenly felt absurdly loud. Donnie let out a low chuckle. Frank shifted in his seat. Elaine rolled her eyes, muttered something under her breath that sounded like Jesus Christ. My mother straightened her spine, but said nothing, eyes narrowing like she was staring down an old enemy. I stood slowly, letting the moment stretch. "Each of you taught me something," I continued. "How to smile while being ignored. How to grow without sunlight. How to stay sane in a house where affection was currency and I was always broke." Frank tried to laugh, one of those weird, half-hearted sounds people make when they're uncomfortable but don't know how to stop themselves. "Well, damn, Daniel, if this is the warm-up, I can't wait for the main course." Elaine shot him a look like she was mentally stabbing him with her butter knife. Janet cleared her throat, then placed a leather-bound folder on the table in front of her. She opened it slowly, deliberately, like a magician about to reveal the last card in the trick. She didn't say anything for a moment, just scanned the papers, then looked directly at Margaret with eyes that didn't blink. "Ma'am," she said calmly, "I believe you know why we're here." Margaret didn't flinch, but something in her face, some small corner of it, tightened, just for a second. The way a person might brace for a slap they knew they deserved, but thought they'd manage to outrun. Elaine looked from her to me, frowning, confused, not used to being out of the loop. Frank leaned forward, sensing drama. Donnie sipped his drink and smiled, clearly enjoying the show. And I just stood there, smiling slightly, like a man who knew he had finally stolen the spotlight and wasn't planning on giving it back anytime soon. The sound of paper rustling can carry an eerie kind of power in a room that's just been emptied of all its certainty, and when Janet opened that folder in front of my mother, the entire table seemed to lean in slightly. Even the wine glasses looked like they were listening. For a few seconds, no one said anything, and the silence between us was so dense it felt like it had weight, like we were all sitting under something we couldn't see, but could definitely feel pressing down. Janet slid the papers from the folder without rushing, her movements smooth and methodical like she'd done this kind of thing before, and I suppose she had, dozens of times, maybe more, but this wasn't just any client meeting and she knew it. This wasn't about money or law or paperwork, it was about power, and more importantly, about taking it back from the people who spent their lives acting like you didn't deserve it in the first place. I stayed standing, hands on the back of my chair, eyes fixed on Margaret, my mother, who stared back with the poise of a woman who had always been in control of every conversation, every dinner, every goddamn holiday, until now. Janet began with a simple sentence, her voice low but clear. "This document contains the full disclosure of your late husband's secondary estate plan, along with a letter addressed to his son, Daniel." That was when Elaine's chair squeaked. She shifted, frowned, glanced from Janet to me like someone realizing a joke had been told in a language they didn't speak, and it had something to do with them. Frank, to his credit, kept quiet, eyes wide now, maybe finally understanding that this wasn't about awkward family tension anymore. This was the beginning of something much bigger. Margaret's lips tightened, but she didn't say a word. "Not yet." Janet placed 2 items on the table. One was a thick, spiral-bound ledger, well-worn, full of notes in the margins, tabs marking certain pages. The other was a folded letter, yellowed slightly at the edges, sealed with a piece of tape and my name scrawled in blocky handwriting. My father's handwriting. That alone was enough to make my stomach turn, not with nerves, but something deeper. Grief, maybe? Or rage I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. I picked up the letter, held it for a moment, then slid a finger beneath the tape and opened it. The first line hit hard. If you're reading this, then your mother finally ran out of places to hide from the truth. I didn't look up. I just kept reading. I never wanted it to end like this. Not with silence between us. Not with you carrying the weight of what I should have had the courage to stop years ago. I watched your mother take pieces of you, little by little, until you believed it was normal to be ignored. And I said nothing. I let it happen because I didn't know how to stand up to her. I failed you. The room was still. I don't think Elaine was breathing. Margaret's hands were folded on her lap, knuckles pale. When she kicked me out that night, and you know damn well she did, it wasn't because I cheated or lied or drank too much. It was because I told her I wanted to give you control of the Florida property. She said I was going senile. Called the lawyer the next morning and started the process of locking down everything. I let her. I was tired. But I didn't forget you. My voice caught a bit, but I kept reading. It needed to be heard. I created a separate trust, one she couldn't touch, one the lawyers couldn't freeze, one you could only access after proving you still had your integrity. The trust is tied to your ability to act without revenge, which is why I made it conditional. You had to invite them, all of them, to dinner. One last chance for truth. If you're reading this out loud, then you did just that. And I'm proud of you, son. When I looked up, Elaine was pale, her mouth open but no words coming out. Margaret, for once, wasn't controlling the narrative. She was sitting in it. Janet spoke again, gently but with that edge attorneys have when they're holding a grenade and asking if you'd like to guess the PIN code. The trust includes the main cabin, the Florida condo, and full rights to the investment accounts your father accumulated after retirement. The assets total just over $1.6 million. Margaret has no legal claim to them. They are under Daniel's full control as of this evening. Elaine finally broke, slamming her hands on the table hard enough to rattle the silverware. This is a goddamn ambush. You manipulated him. You always knew he was losing it, and you used that. I stayed calm, which probably made her even more furious. You think I planned his death? He was dying for a year, Elaine. While you were busy planning galas and getting fillers, I was wiping his mouth and changing his bandages. Frank tried to speak but stopped himself, and Donnie, bless that man, leaned back in his chair and said, "Should have brought popcorn." Margaret stood, slow and deliberate, her voice steely. That trust is invalid. I'll fight it. I'll drag this into court and tear it apart piece by piece. I looked at her, finally let the smile come. The one I'd been saving since the day she told me I was too sensitive for asking why Elaine got a birthday party and I got a pair of socks. I said, "You already lost. You just don't know it yet." And that's when I saw it, a crack, the first real one, in the armor she'd worn my entire life. She didn't sit back down. But she didn't argue either. And for Margaret, that was as close to surrender as she'd ever come. There's a strange kind of peace that comes not when the storm finally passes, but when you realize the thunder never scared you to begin with. It was just noise, always noise, and you were the one who gave it power. I stood there in front of the old fireplace in that dimly lit room with its gold-trimmed plates and untouched dessert, and I held a box in my hands that weighed almost nothing but carried more history than anything else in that room. It was my father's watch, old and worn and missing the leather strap he always promised he'd replace, but never did. The ticking had faded over the years, not because it was broken, but because time, much like truth, only reveals itself when you finally decide to stop pretending it doesn't matter. I held the box out toward Elaine, and for a moment, she looked at it like I was handing her a grenade with the pin halfway out. She didn't move to take it, not right away. Her lips parted like she was about to say something, maybe apologize, maybe curse me out, but nothing came. Just silence. That same silence she had gifted me my entire life, wrapped in sarcasm and passive-aggressive smiles and questions that sounded like compliments, but always landed like daggers. "This was his," I said, voice steady, low. "He wanted you to have it." She finally took the box, hands trembling just slightly, her eyes darting between me and the thing inside. "Why?" she asked, and the question wasn't accusatory, it was scared. Confused. As if for the first time in her entire life, she didn't understand the rules of the game we'd all been playing since childhood. "Because you always wanted everything," I said, and I didn't raise my voice. "I didn't need to. So now you get to keep time." "Me? I'm free." Elaine flinched like I'd slapped her, but I hadn't even moved. Frank shifted uncomfortably in his chair, clearing his throat like a man choking on the last joke he'll ever tell in that house. Donnie just leaned back and sipped his drink, that smirk still on his face like he was watching the season finale of a show he thought would get canceled years ago. Janet closed the folder with the kind of finality that makes people sit up straighter. "As of tonight, Daniel has full control of the main property, the Florida condo, and the remaining accounts listed under the secondary trust," she said. "The structure of the estate allows for discretionary disbursement, meaning he can choose if, when, and how other beneficiaries receive anything." Her eyes scanned the table, and for the first time that night, even Margaret blinked. Elaine looked up again, this time not angry, not proud, but lost. And that was something I never thought I'd see in her. She was the woman who once told me to my face that I was lucky to be ignored, because it meant no one expected anything from me. She once told a friend at a barbecue that I was the kind of man who made a good ghost, always there, but never quite part of the picture. And now she was the one fading, piece by piece, like a candle burning too fast in a room where no one wanted the lights on. I turned to my mother next, and the weight of that stare was heavier than any box or document. She looked at me with that same calm detachment, the kind that says, "I did what I had to, even if what she did was build an empire on silence and call it structure." "I'm not here to ruin anyone," I said slowly, clearly, as if reading her a bedtime story she'd never forget. "But I'll no longer be your shadow." She didn't respond. She didn't nod. She didn't blink. Just sat there, perfectly still, the ice queen in her fortress of old furniture and older regrets. I took one final look at the table, at the people who had spent their lives talking over me, around me, through me, and I felt something strange crack open in my chest. It wasn't joy. It wasn't even pride. It was release. The kind of quiet that doesn't need applause or witnesses. Just breath. Janet gathered her things and followed me out. When we reached the door, she looked at me and asked the question I knew she'd been holding since she saw the plan come together. "Do you want to cut them off completely?" I paused, the night air hitting my face like a clean slate. For a moment, I considered walking away forever, slamming every door shut, closing every window, and building a wall so high no apology could ever scale it. But then I smiled, not cruelly, just honestly. The kind of smile that says you've finally stopped bleeding. "No," I said. "Let them hope I might forgive them. That's the real punishment." She didn't say anything after that. She didn't have to. We got into our cars without another word. I drove without music, without noise, just the sound of tires on pavement and the wind brushing against the glass. The road stretched out ahead of me like a promise I didn't need to keep. The night was long, the stars were small and scattered, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the weight of being forgotten. I felt empty, but not hollow. More like a clean plate at the end of a long, bitter meal. No destination, no speech, no dramatic final twist, just motion. Just leaving, and maybe, in the end, that's all the closure any of us ever really get.